Hello and welcome to Module 3 of Azure CSP SMB Sales Fundamentals. My name is Kenny and I'm from Exceed and we'll be presenting our webinar today. Today we'll be talking about some sales opportunities in Azure. I've got a bit of an agenda list here. We'll start talking about migrating workloads into Azure and how to efficiently do it. Building a go-to market offer and what you need to know in that. Looking at the Windows 2008 and SQL 2008 end of service opportunities, or end of support, sorry, that's a typo there. Optimizing business continuity and disaster recovery with Azure, and saving costs with hybrid use benefit and reserve instances. Migrating VM workloads to Azure. Let's have a look at this. This is the easiest opportunity to approach Azure, and it should be what every CSP partner should consider mastering in order to enable the customers for moving into the cloud. This is because a majority of the customers have an existing on-premise IT infrastructure already. What you want to do is always look at how we can move that into the cloud as an opportunity to consume the cloud. So these are the typical common triggers that you should be aware of to pick up opportunities. The examples are like, how do we increase business agility? How do we optimize operations? How do we reduce complexity? And how do we save cost? These are sort of, it will spin out of conversations that you might have with your customers in terms of talking about, I'm worried about not being able to expand my business quickly enough. I'm looking at a potential growth in the industry in the next 6 months. How do we increase the ability to change, and can operations change with it? And then how do we ensure that the environment is not too convoluted with all of the different components? How do we reduce the complexity, and how do we saving cost is normally a key question or key conversation with some of the customers, and using the cloud allows you to sort of scale to save, like what we covered in Module 2. How do we improve our experience and engagements? How do we transform products and services? And how do we disrupt markets? These are more about innovation and how to develop changes to the industry. The cloud and Azure gives you that advantage by being able to analyze the business's data a little bit better. So a lot of projects will be around that. Migrating into the cloud enables the customer to access innovation type technology that allows them to evolve and change. So these are the sort of key conversations that you should be thinking about when engaging customers. Here's a good guide to a migration journey. I always talk about taking the migration, the journey to the cloud. Take the customer along as a journey. So you start with an assessment piece, figure out the current state, and look at what the future state should be. Based on what the motivation is to migrate. So this is sort of stems from the conversation with the customers. Like, if their motivation is about cost, then what we want to do is assess and design based around cost. If they want to optimize the operations, as in reduce the amount of administrative works on the servers, then you focus, instead of IaaS, you focus more on PaaS and SaaS type opportunities. So this is where you make a lot of that decision. Then you develop a plan between the assessment and migration period. You develop a plan, and then you start migrating the resources across into the cloud. After that, once you've migrated the infrastructure to the cloud, then you start optimizing by performing resource optimization again, by figuring out what resources are not used and scaling down the servers. Or you also look at operational optimization and security optimization by adjusting or adopting operational practices by deploying tools like Azure Monitor, or optimizing for backups with disaster recovery, for using Azure Site Recovery and Azure Backups, using Azure Sentinel as one of those security information and event management tools. There's a lot of different opportunities or tools in Azure that allows you to optimize operationally and security, optimize your security as well. So what are the different strategies for cloud migration? Now, there's four main strategies. The easiest and probably the most straightforward way is to rehost, as in a typical lifting the VM or operating system on premises and moving it into the cloud, moving into Azure. You would use something like Azure Site Recovery to do a lift and shift, or you would back up the VM files and you would do a V2V or a P2V equivalent if it's on VMware. If it's already on Hyper-V on premises, you would just take the VHD files and you copy it into Azure and then you deploy it from there. This is a very common method of doing it, but also not really optimal, because you're bringing a lot of the inefficiencies of on-premises with you into the cloud. What you can also do is, while migrating, look at refactoring. So instead of bringing a VM into IaaS, the VM is hosting SQL. We move the SQL database into Azure SQL for PaaS. Then you no longer need to worry about looking after the OS layer. You're looking after the service that sits on top of the OS, which is the SQL database. That's one of the main examples. I mean, there's always, like, you've got a website hosted on IaaS on a web server sitting on premise. You move that into Azure Web Services. That's your options there. Re-architecting talks about changing code, but not a lot of the code. So altering the way it works to re-architect. You sort of move towards containers and serverless environments and microservices. You start changing the already developed solution and you split it up into different microservices and you deploy it into serverless environments. To rebuild means rewriting the code. So a lot of scenarios, customers will have applications that are very legacy, that cannot, that doesn't live on websites, that is not modern. So they have to sit on an RDS server where a user has to log in and access. The best way to approach this scenario is rebuilding the application from the ground up, and building it in a modern approach where you can adopt microservices and serverless or containerization. Those are the key changes that you would do in a rebuild. Rebuild tends to be the most costly in terms of redeveloping the application. In the SMB space, you would typically use more of the rehost and refactor, especially with a managed service provider. And that's because a lot of managed service providers are not application developers. But what I do recommend is to work with the application developers to sort of re-architect the existing application code and helping them understand the infrastructure space of the Azure cloud. Here is a sample project plan, a sample plan that you would normally develop when you have a migration project. This is sort of what it would look like. In the SMB space, this might be a little bit too big. You would scale it down a little bit, like the preparation phase might only be a couple of days, 2 to 3 days to figure out what the requirements are and what your destination architecture, solution architecture that you want to go to would be, and then you start developing a design process. You wouldn't typically take 20 days. This is probably more of a 200 seat project, design project that you would do. If you're looking at a 20 to 50 seat project, you would scale this down a lot more. Once you've done your preparation phase, you would then go into your assessments and scoring phase, where you would start looking at what's currently there, what's currently on site, and you look at optimization, you look at resource optimization, you look at what kind of VMs that you will be going to. So preparation talks about the shape of your solution, what it looks like in a high level. Assessments and scoring phase, you would then go into more of a detailed what the solution will look like, and then you start planning how do you migrate each component for the solution across. How do you develop the networking? What are your naming conventions? How do you develop your operational planning? So you would typically have a little bit more time in assessments and scoring. That's because you want to ensure that the migration project is not just a build and hand over, especially with all you MSPs out there. You want to ensure that your operational practice is also in place to look after the solution once it's migrated, right? And in phase 3, you actually get into the guts of it, the actual migration phase and the testing post-migration, and then cut over after that. This is sort of your typical project and your planning of that project. Now, migration for Windows. Microsoft has a page that has the migration guide. It's sort of like a pretty in-depth guide on why you would migrate, how you would migrate, and what are the best practices around it. I recommend you to have a read on this, download the guide, and keep it handy. It's always good to sort of go back and refer to it once in a while. It's one of those sort of guidebooks that you should keep on hand if you're in the business of doing migrations into Azure. Yeah, let's not forget the Azure free assessments again. I mean, I've talked about this quite a few times in the past. If you have a project with 20 VMs or more, or an approximate 5K monthly Azure consumption, have a look into the free assessments. I mean, if the customer has an environment that could reach 5K, there is no commit to move to get the free assessments. You get the assessments, you get the reports, you present it to the customer. If they don't like it, that's fine. If they, this is more of a key tool to enable that conversation about moving into the cloud. It gives you the ability to do a cost comparison between the two, and it's I find it as a very good tool to help you just start your business practice. It's a good starting point for you to learn how to do these migration projects, especially if you haven't done one to Azure. If you don't have projects that could qualify the free assessments, I recommend to have a look at the Azure Migration Center for Azure Migrate. It's sort of pretty much the same, except you don't get someone from Microsoft doing it for you. You've got to do it yourself as an MSP, but you could definitely build a practice around this. get used to the assessment tools in the Azure Migration Center. They will teach you how to run the tools, and then the type of data that you would get out of it. You would still have to optimize based on your experience. It doesn't optimize it for you, right? So there's a lot of subject matter experts for that customer, which is what you are as an MSP or as a CSP partner. That a lot of it would come down to your experience with the customer. You know that the server will need to be resourced enough to the point where because 1 week a month it gets hammered because of the amount of use it gets. Those are the kind of scenarios that your expertise comes into play with these kind of tools. The Migration Center also includes the actual migration tools, which is the Azure Site Recovery. What also comes as part of the Migration Center are the third-party partners that have built go-to-market products to help accelerate migrations, to help customers and partners migrate into the Azure platform. So you don't have the ones that are available from Azure are free for use of migration. There are paid third-party ones that enable you faster migration or more controlled migration for specific scenarios and things like that. Also with optimization tools, there are tools out there that will help you look at optimizing the solution. Once you've migrated the workload into Azure, then you should look at hardening and optimizing the monitoring and management, the administration of the servers, and optimizing your ITIL process, your change management, your incident management, ensuring that all of your processes align to the way Azure works and things like that. One of the key opportunities, and this is sort of the first opportunity that is available on CSP. It's the very first catalyst opportunity to allow more services to be onboarded into Azure, because the last end of support cycle, Azure CSP wasn't really there. It wasn't available yet. So a lot of the channel defaulted to reselling on premises, defaulted to refreshing a lot of the tin back on premises. Now with the end of support for Windows 2008 and SQL 2008 should coincide with some of the hardware refreshes as well. This is an opportunity to start looking into migrating into Azure. Microsoft has given quite a few incentives to do that. One of the main incentive is you've got a 2008 R2 server, you've got applications sitting on that 2008 R2 or SQL 2008 R2 server. That application can't change because the developer is not ready to upgrade the application to support Windows 2016 or Windows 2019 or SQL Server 2018, 2019. Now, what do we need to do? We need to keep it running, because and security updates are important, right? So there's two options. One is you buy the extended security updates and you install it onto the on-premises server. Now, ESU has to be bought every year, and year on year, the cost will double. If you shift that server into Azure, then Azure will provide, Microsoft will provide the ESU free. So shifting it into Azure, you get ESU as part of the VM running in Azure. ESU will end in 2023 for Windows Server and 2022 for SQL Server. But this buys you the additional, if we look at what date it's March 2020 now, it'll buy you an additional 2.5 years to move the application off Windows 2008 and SQL 2008 into a newer version that allow you to run, right? So this basically buys you time to continue functioning as a business while looking to upgrade the services. This is sort of an overview of the server product lifecycle with Windows Server and SQL Server. You would get the 5 years mainstream support with every version that comes out. So this means new features will come in. You definitely get security updates and non-security updates on it. Once the 5 years is ended, then you would you would go into the extended support phase where only security updates and non-security updates are being applied. New features would no longer be built in because those will go into the next version of the operating system or SQL Server product. What this means is SQL Server 2008 has ended in July 9th, 2019, and Windows Server 2008 and 2008 R2 had ended in January 14, 2020. So, what are our options when migrating to Azure? Or what are our options if we hit a scenario, actually? We hit a scenario where we are running a Windows 2008 or with the SQL 2008 server. With Windows 2008, your option is upgrade or in-place upgrade the OS within the data center, within the on-premises physical server, or migrate it into Azure. That's your second option. Here's the migration path on premises. So to get it to Windows 2019, you would have to upgrade it in place to Windows 2012, and then upgrade it to Windows 2016 before you can upgrade it to Windows 2019. Actually, I don't believe this is right. Oh, here it is. You have to upgrade it to Windows 2012, and then you can actually upgrade it to Windows 2019 from there. You don't have to go to Windows 2016. It's yeah, the arrow didn't show up. But this is sort of your upgrade path. Now you could actually just lift and shift it from Windows 2008 into Azure. You could upgrade it to 2012 and lift and shift it into Azure, or you could upgrade it all the way to 2019 and lift and shift it to Azure. You could even shift it into Azure, get your security updates, and in place upgrade it within Azure to Windows 2012 or Windows, to Windows 2012 and then to Windows 2019 from there. Those are sort of your options in this kind of scenarios. That's sort of if the conversation comes up. So security updates, why do we care about it? Why is it required? It's mainly because, well, security updates is mission critical now. We might not see that 20 years ago or 10 years ago even, right? Because Windows XP and Windows 2003 lasted for so long. But with the recent outbreak in a lot of issues, especially with the Intel Spectre issue, with the CPU being vulnerable, that's one of the main examples of why security updates are mission critical, and why Windows and Microsoft have changed sort of their strategy around patching to a more frequent patching cycle rather than a big bulk patch in a service pack every couple of years, right? Right now, it's more about patching every month. And key reasons for that is because vulnerabilities always happen. Vulnerabilities are always being discovered. O-Day vulnerabilities are being discovered every day, right? So in order to patch and block those vulnerabilities, you need to patch the servers and patch the operating systems to prevent those vulnerabilities from being exploited. And that's one of the key things. Now, what we want to do is seize this opportunity at the moment, this first opportunity for end of support. What we're seeing in the market is your there are so many IT systems that are still running outdated operating systems at the moment, and this means more profits to be made, more revenue per employee that you as an MSP can get. You know, people that are doing a lot of end of support migrations are seeing 50% higher average net income on revenue based on the projects for end of support migration. This is a a big opportunity at the moment. Part of the end of support options as well is modernizing the application, looking at chances, looking at opportunities to refactor, re-architect, and rebuild. You don't necessarily want to just rehost the environment into the cloud and get the extended security. That buys you time. But if you start refactoring or re-architecting, then you can modernize the application and prevent this scenario from happening 3 years from now. Right. So these are your key options around that. Just to summarize on the path to upgrade, the migration to Azure, you get free extended security updates for Windows Server and SQL Server 2008 if you move them into Azure for 3 years after the deadline. So from today's date, it's 2.5 years. From end of this year, it's 2 years, right? Don't migrate SQL servers. Try and look at migrating them into Azure SQL managed instances or Azure SQL database. That's sort of it will definitely save you cost instead of migrating it into a VM in Azure. Have a look at the Azure hybrid benefits as well, because you're on premises. You might have software assurance on your licenses. This would definitely you would be able to BYOL those licenses into Azure and apply discounts and save on costs there. So here is an example of an opportunity for MSPs, managed service providers out there. Instead of doing a one-off professional services project for migration, you migrate and then you forget about it. Build it into your managed services offering, right? Turn it into a journey. You migrate the application or solution across into Azure. Then you look at developing and hardening the environment. You develop the server, hardening the server. You optimize the management and operations. You develop new managed services for management and operations of that service. Deploying things like Azure Backup, Azure Monitor. Azure Monitor as well has different workbooks that allows you to, for example, with Backup Explorer on Azure Monitor now, you deploy Azure Monitor workbook into the Azure Backups, and you can start looking at the Azure Backups services. Those are your different scenarios, your different operational optimizations that you can apply, right? Optimization isn't just about saving costs; it's about improving resiliency of the solution as well. Previously you have a single tin sitting on premises. You pretty much don't have any resiliency apart from backups, right? Moving it into the cloud, you can start building with site recovery. You can start building DR sites available for quicker restoration time, RTOs, right? Or you can build redundancies as well. You can start backing up servers into longer retention periods. You can improve on recoverability. You can improve on security with Azure Security Center. You can allow for automated management through a lot of the different tools in Azure as well. On top of that, you can actually look at refactoring and re-architecting your infrastructure even, and developing DevOps by developing DevOps or adopting DevOps, then you can improve your deployment practices. You can deploy entire solutions within a click of a button. You know, maybe 5 to 10 minutes to deploy a full solution. You basically moving it into the cloud, migrating it into the cloud, opens up all of these opportunities. It gives you all of these different tool sets that you might not really have or would cost a lot of money developing the infrastructure to have it on premises. The cloud just makes it a lot cheaper to adopt all of that optimization value. Why choose Azure? Why not AWS when moving, Windows Server end of life? So another key thing is if you move a server or SQL 2008 into Azure and apply hybrid benefit and apply reserved instances to it into Azure, the cost that has been calculated, and this has been shown out by Microsoft, it comes to be about 5 times cheaper than AWS. If you and that the key factors around it is mainly around the free extended security updates that you would get from Azure, as well as the hybrid benefit that you get from Azure. You can't hybrid benefit on AWS. So these are the key differences. And you would find typically, it's up to about 5 times cheaper than AWS. Here's an executive summary on what we're looking at around the world at the moment. On a workload landscape, we're looking at large SMBs are the most matured in the sense of moving into the cloud and migrating the workloads within 12 months into Azure. That's not to say that the smaller SMBs can't or are not looking to. There are small SMBs that are looking to do it as well, but just not as much as 50%, the 50% in the large SMB space that are already looking into adopting compliance and marketing and BI and insights. The main motivators across all SMBs, the number one motivator is cost optimization. A lot of people complain about how cloud and Azure is costing more than on premises. That's because they're not optimizing correctly. They're not looking at optimizing the resources down and optimizing in terms of refactoring, changing the workload instead of an IaaS, change it to a PaaS service. Removing all services that don't need to be on IaaS or PaaS, moving them into SaaS. Those are one of the main factors. If you do that consistently and do it frequently and optimize it frequently, you would definitely see a save in cost. 64% of SMB customers want to work with strategic partner that have technical expertise. They expect the partners to be capable and will assist in the migration and upgrade. So this just means that you should upskill, right? It just means that build the practice, build the experience, get it done. That's why we have things like the free assessments. That's why we have things like Azure Migrate. It's to help you build your experience in gathering the knowledge and building a proper practice so that the customers feel more comfortable. The offers and incentives, there are plenty of the free migration assessment incentives. Customers are seeing it. They're being aware. They've been aware of it. 49% of customers are seeing that it's appealing. Especially, this is more important. 45% of customers are seeing that it's relevant to their business. So have a look at your customers. Have a look at what they have, and see if we can take up this offer to give it to them. The end of support awareness spectrum. There are not many SMBs that are aware, but they're actually using Windows 2008 R2 servers, and SQL servers. Once they've been made aware, more than half of them are concerned that they're out of service, they're out of support, right? I mean, a vulnerability comes in, and they lose their data, they lose their servers, which are typically for small businesses, right? They wouldn't have redundant servers to help them. So it's actually more important. The end of support should be more important to small SMBs compared to medium and large, because the medium and large spaces tend to have they would have had more preparedness around disaster recovery and HA compared to the small SMBs. So these are your key opportunities here that you should be looking into. Yeah, what we're seeing is currently that there is no single CSP partner that is winning over their SMB market in Azure. There's no single partner actually currently in the SMB space, especially in the small to medium SMB space, that are competently doing managed services for Azure. This means there's a big gap there for you to build into and a lot of money to earn. Now, how do we build a go-to-market offer as an MSP? Right. At the moment, managed partners, what are they doing? They're getting customers. Customers are buying the hardware, and customers are owning the hardware. This is the typical scenario, right? Customers own the hardware, and a managed service provider charges a fee on top of that to manage the hardware. But the IP, the support, the operations are all part of that managed services. What you can do is build a migration piece, a migration to operation piece around that, on migrating the services into Azure, and then charging based on the number of workloads in Azure, or what is being looked after, whether it's a 24/7, what are the KPIs. So here's sort of a checklist to help you keep track of what you're building into your go-to-market strategy for an MSP. Come up with a business plan and figure out who you're targeting and what you're targeting. So are you planning to look after backups and operations? Are you looking after the 24/7 operational running of the servers and services in the cloud? What are your KPIs? What are your goals? Are you going to set a new trend by offering much better availability and resiliency for the solutions? Obviously, you've got to build your solution around that when you're migrating. What are your sales and marketing plans around that? Think about which markets are you looking out for? Are you targeting small businesses? Are you targeting medium-sized or large businesses? What is your value proposition versus the next person, the next company, the next MSP? What makes you better than them? How do you market to entire channels, right? Full entire channels of customers. Who do you target? How do you adopt digital and automation practices to your offering? How do you accelerate your deployments? What kind of investment plan do you need to put into this? Do you need to invest up front, or is it, do you already have the business available? You just need to tweak it. These are the key things you need to think about when developing a go-to-market strategy for your managed services. I would like to point out one key tool that is sort of changing the landscape for a lot of MSPs right now in building go-to-market strategies, in go-to-market offerings. Azure Lighthouse is a tool available that lets you sort of build and reach out further than what you would normally reach out to currently. Because currently you're only reaching out to the local companies that you can see and feel, right? Lighthouse allows you to build a managed service offering, specific managed service offering like backup as a service, where you look into different opportunities for looking after customers' backup solutions, right? You can use Azure Lighthouse to build a product that is ready to put onto Azure Marketplace. A customer that doesn't know you but is looking for a backup solution can then go into the marketplace. Oh, MSP provider A has a backup solution here. They look at their services, click on it, and it's all automated to the point where it's just a single click and you've gotten access. You've created access to that tenant and you can start deploying your backup as a service solution to them. So these are key technologies that allow you to build your backup, your managed service practice. Have a look into Azure Lighthouse as a tool. Come talk to me about it if you need more information about it. I'm happy to run some workshops, and I've got some examples on how to onboard into Azure Lighthouse and how that works and everything. So we can run through that together. The next big section, we're going to the next big section right now, is BCDR. So BCDR, business continuity, disaster recovery, right? Everyone is currently going through COVID-19 at the moment, and we're seeing a lot of people being affected by the lockdowns. What is the disaster recovery? What is the business continuity plan? How do we continue to function as a business while being trapped at home, right? If we're not essential services, but even also essential services that are running, like the supermarkets have to run right now. How do they cater for the additional workload? The prime example right now is the supermarket's online shopping platform is being overwhelmed, right? How do we support those processes in a disaster scenario, right? This is what BCDR is about. This is optimizing BCDR with Azure. The plans isn't just limited to shifting the IT infrastructure to the cloud, right? It's also about scaling. So it's about talking about how do we scale up services because the website is currently down. How do we increase the number of web services quickly to cater for that resources? And then how do we scale back down? So it's not just about scaling out and increase cost, but scaling down when we need to scale down as key. You know, one of the major factors with the current situation at the moment is businesses are having to shut down because they're not essential services. So how do we scale down the resources in order to save costs and to get over this period of this lockdown period? Those are key. Those are sort of considerations you need to build into your Azure environment, your platform, right? Azure gives you the ability to do all of that, to work remotely, to build capabilities to work remotely as well. You know? So key questions we should be asking in the different solution areas for BCDR. So you would take your BCDR strategy, and you tend to divide it into different towers, areas, right? One of the main ones you would look at, and I would like to actually skip that and go forward a little bit first, you know. One of the main ones you would look at is your tower, is your high availability tower, right? This means how do I guarantee that the service my IT infrastructure is servicing is always available or available to a certain amount. That's high availability. Right. What is disaster recovery is how do I guarantee that in the event of a shutdown, a disaster, I can recover what I've lost in one geographical location in a separate geographical location. That's disaster recovery. Backup and restore is just, how do I be sure that if I lose data, I'm going to be able to get it back? You would rank it from high availability to full resiliency, high resiliency, to disaster recovery being secondary, and backups being the last resort, the last mile, right? Let's go back to the previous slide now. So the key questions by the different solution areas that we want to ask. I've sort of left out the high availability because in the small to medium SMB market, you don't typically look at high availability, like full high availability much. There's different levels of high HA. When we talk about HA as a full solution, that's going to cost too much for an SMB customer, right? Unless the service requires it, what you typically do in an HA scenario with SMB customers are you HA the specific service. So if it's a SQL database, you might want to HA that database, but you don't necessarily want to HA the rest of the entire IT infrastructure. In big enterprises, they would HA full solutions, full units of solutions, right? But that would cost too much for, and it's sort of outside the scope of an SMB scenario. So what we want to look at in a whole, as a big whole solution, the key questions in each solution areas, the last mile you should always have, and the first step you should always look into is making sure you have backups. Are you considering replacing and spending your current disk or tape solution? So when moving into the cloud, what do we look at? What do we ask when we're considering backups, right? Would you like to eliminate the tape from your data center and remote offices? Then what these questions are talking about is moving into a cloud type backup solution like Azure Backup, and then having it more resilient by putting the Azure backups, instead of being a locally redundant store, you put it in a geo-redundant store. So if the data center in region 1 or region A in Azure goes down, at least it's geographically redundant. You can still restore the backups from a separate recovery space. My customers tell me that they're concerned about supporting legacy backup media. So Azure allows you to do to keep your legacy backup media on premises. So this is back to the hybrid functions of Azure, right? You back up to tape, but then you also back up to local storage, and you take that local storage and back up to cloud, so that you keep multiple instances of your backup. Therefore, you're safer. Again, backup as the last mile. This has to always work, right? Archiving the backups, so keeping backups on a hot storage that is being accessed might cost too much. So what are our alternatives? Because in New Zealand, especially SMB in New Zealand, we've got criteria we've got to meet. We've got to meet 7 years worth of storage, or 7 years worth of data. We've got to keep 7 years worth of data. So how do we archive the backups? So these are questions you got to ask during that scenario. And then disaster recovery, right? Like, do we need to cater for what happens if we get a power outage across Auckland? Do we need to be able to recover against that kind of disaster by shifting or having redundant data up in Wellington, let's say? So these are the different scenarios. Putting it in Azure allows you to sort of cater for all of that. These are the questions you got to ask so that you know what kind of solutions you're developing for your customer. Now, here's a good view on resiliency, the resiliency I was talking about, right? And the difference in your solution, right? So if we look in a single VM scenario, right, you're not going to have much HA, much high availability on a single VM scenario because it's a zero. If the server goes down, you've lost the service, right? But what you want to do is having a single VM makes it easier to shift, easier to move around, right? So you would then only rely on the generic SLAs given from the premium storage on Azure. If you're not running on premium storage, you don't really get any SLAs at all. But that means you rely on your backups as your resiliency. You take it to the next level. If you want to build availability in the data center level, then you might want to build 2 servers and you put it on a data availability set for you to have data center levels resiliency, right? So you build 2 web servers hosting your website, and you chuck it on a different availability set. What happens if the first website goes down? The second one still functions because it's sitting on different hardware. This sort of supports you on the hardware failure level. Then with the availability zones in Azure, you get to sort of protect yourself on a regional level. So if Sydney goes down, then we rely on Melbourne as a within the. Well, actually, no, that's not spanning across regions. Sorry, that's spanning across the entire data center. So on an availability zone, if let's say data center within availability zone 1 goes down, then it shifts to the second set of data centers in availability zone 2 within the same region, like Melbourne. So it's different data center groups within the region. And then you've got regional pairs, which sort of you develop your solution based on separate regions like Melbourne and Sydney. So planning for availability, what we want to do is always plan in the assumption that because IaaS and PaaS on Azure, Microsoft is handling patching on the hardware and the sort of the infrastructure that they look after and they provide, they will send out notifications during maintenance times, right? So there are a few different scenarios for planned maintenance. So Microsoft will let you know and say, and you need to sort of communicate this to your customers as well, that and set the precedent, right? That on a planned maintenance time, you might have a scenario where there's a reboot that is required. If there's a reboot required, then Microsoft will notify all users or all providers on it. It gives you 30 days to redeploy. So they basically what happens is they'll set that hardware on a standby, on a not offline mode, but it's not accepting new customers, new users, right? They'll set it on standby, and then when you redeploy or reboot, your machine will boot into the set that is not being maintained. Right, so Microsoft will give you 30 days to do that yourself, to organize with the customer and do a reboot, because a reboot is a lot shorter than bringing it down and updating the machine, right? So reboot it and move it across to the machine sets that are not being updated, being maintained. If it reaches the 30 days, then Microsoft is just going to redeploy it and shift all of the machines off the hardware that they're going to maintain and then run their maintenance. On scenarios where there's unplanned downtime, that's dependent on your design. That's dependent on your solution design, making sure that you deploy availability sets, availability zones, making sure that you deploy site recovery correctly so that you can spin up the server if it goes down, things like that. Unplanned downtimes, there's nothing much that Microsoft can do. There's no heads up because we don't know what's going to happen. It just happens, right? So when you do your solution design, when you do your solution gathering, make sure you take that into consideration. Is this service important enough? Do we need to make sure that it's up and running? What is the maximum amount of time we can take before letting it go down? Next, we talk about the 3 typical solutions around Azure: Azure Backup, Azure Site Recovery, and virtual machine. Azure virtual machines that you just deploy multiple instances. Here's a quick overview on Azure Backup. Basically the same as an on-premises backup solution, except there's no tape involved. You're just backing up into a storage location, and it's a storage repository that keeps the backups. You can set retention times, backup times, things like that. There's Azure Monitor workbooks, as I mentioned before, that allows you to look at the backups with Backup Explorer and Backup Monitor now. That will enhance the Azure backup experience. You will notice that a lot of the services in Azure are being updated and upgraded almost every day, and new features are being rolled out all the time. So things will change from tomorrow onwards. You might get a different things. How Azure Backup Agent works? Well, there's a few different scenarios. We might need to talk about this in more detail later, but for now, if you build a VM in Azure, or if you run any PaaS solutions in Azure, Azure Backup, well, on PaaS solutions that are compatible to Azure Backup, Azure Backup just goes in and pulls the snapshots of the VMs or whatever. If you're running Azure Backup against a machine on premises, you have to install an agent on the machine, and it starts pulling files into Azure Backup repository, the backup repository from there. Next up is Site Recovery, Azure Site Recovery. This is a key tool used for migration, but it also allows you to build a disaster recovery type scenario, right? You're backing up the entire VM into a different site. If you're and what it allows you to do as well is, if the main VM, if the live production VM goes down, then you can liven up the disaster site and continue running your business within a much shorter turnaround, a shorter recovery time compared to restoring from backup. Right? You can imagine restoring from backup takes hours. Site recovery will be minutes to recover to a restored site. If you want less than that, if you want to make sure that both sites are up and running at the same time, then you look at HA. You look at load balancing the services across the regions and things like that. Now, workload support for Azure Site Recovery. Site recovery supports, and this is also for migration purposes, right? Site recovery supports vCenter, so ESX. It supports Hyper-V. It supports a P2V scenario with a physical OS, right? It supports going from Windows 2008, Windows 2012, and 2016. I think this slide is a bit out of date. It should support Windows 2019 as well, right? It also supports Windows OS, Linux OS. Previously, people were surprised when I said Azure supports Linux. Yes, so we're talking about guest support, as in the VM sitting on Azure to be moved into Azure. You can move these versions of these flavors of Linux into Azure. Let's go to the next page. Here we go. Here's a typical high-level architecture of what a typical on-premises to Azure migration project would look like. I'm not going to describe it too much here. Just know that it's just, on-premises, you create the gateway, you create a web tier, business tier, data tier, and you start moving your VMs into the different tiers. That allows you to logically split your environments in Azure. And then, instead of enabling direct access to all of the VMs by opening up RDP port to the world, you create a jump box, and you connect to the jump box, and then through there it's protected by a firewall or NSG, and then you log on to your servers from there. So this is sort of a typical high-level architecture you would look into when you're moving something into Azure. Challenges: overcoming business challenge of Azure, right? So the main ways you can build a managed service into Azure is by just understanding the key solutions. I recommend doing the AZ900 fundamentals exam, or studying for it at least, or going through the Microsoft Learn website and learning about what are the different solutions that are currently being offered in Azure. By understanding the solutions like Azure Backup, Site Recovery, Monitor, Security Center, Azure Migrate, by understanding the different tools, you know what is capable. When you're talking to your customer and a scenario comes up, you can then say, yes, I believe we can do this in Azure, because there is almost nothing you can do in on-premises that you can do in Azure. There's like that you can't do in Azure, right? Everything you can do on premises, you can pretty much do it in Azure. So you just need to know what are the tools that you need to do. Expectations for fluctuations in monthly fluctuations in pricing. So one of the main worries about cost in Azure is the price differences month on month, right? It's not set. So what I recommend is taking Azure as a managed service itself, as an ingredient in your managed services. Bring it on board as an ingredient, like how you would with an engineer's time, right? Take it and build your managed service offering around that. Do a results-based managed service offering rather than a reseller type scenario. Then you can also remove all sorts of variable costings and everything like that might be accounted to that. Obviously, you would have to have a level of experience to achieve this, but you just have to do it. The more you do it, the more you get used to it, and you can build your scenarios from there. So we've just reached an hour. I did mention yesterday that we will go to possibly an hour and a half, and we've got reserve instances and hybrid benefit to look into right now. These are very key, but if people if anyone who is currently busy and only has an hour and wants to jump off, just get in touch with me. We will talk about reserve instances and hybrid benefit in more detail as well if you need to, but I'll just continue going into this explanation here. So with reserve instances, so I always mention that Azure is consumption-based model. You pay for what you've consumed in the past month, right? You don't buy up front. You don't prepay for it. You basically consume it first, eat the food first, and then pay at the counter later, right? With reserve instances, it's sort of a little bit different. It's for the customers that want more consistency in their pricing. What reserve instances are is for VM capacity. You're basically reserving the instance and you're committing to Microsoft that you're going to run that instance for 1 year or 3 years, 24/7. You're committing to Microsoft saying that this machine will run. If it doesn't run, I'm still going to pay for it anyway. So you're buying, you're basically buying the resources up front. Now, reserve instances are not just pay up front. There's 2 ways of paying for it. You can pay it up front as you pay for the full 12 months or full 36 months at that point in time, or you can pay monthly. So what happens is Microsoft will take the 12 months and divide it by 12, and then you pay the monthly bill from there. Problem with paying monthly is on Azure Plan, because of the foreign exchange price differences, The reserve instances that are being charged monthly, that is being paid monthly, are susceptible to changes in Forex, right? So if there's a 5 basis points increase, the reserve instance that is running on monthly for that month would increase by 5 basis points. If you've paid up front, you've basically locked in that Forex charge, that Forex rate for that term, for that point in time. So those are the main differences you've got to take into consideration when looking to pay up front versus pay monthly. The other thing about reserve instances is a reserve instance does not target a single virtual machine. A reserve instance targets the family of machines within that region. So if we've got a D type, let's say a D type family machine, D2, V2, let's say, for example, right? When you buy a reserve instance for D2, it targets that family. So if you have 2 machines, but you only buy 1 reserve instance, you're only applying it to half of your full set of D2 family instances across your Azure subscription. Right? You're still buying 1 full VM, but it's one of the 2 VMs that are being applied to. So let's say you shut down one of the VMs, the reserved instance still applies 100% because it's applying to the other machine that is of the same type. The scenario gets complicated when you have more machines, let's say 10 D2v2 machines, you buy 10 reserve instances, you shut down 2 and you add 5, right? Then it becomes a bit complicating. The main aim is to ensure that every reserve instance you buy for that family is optimized and used, as in there is at least 1 machine to 1 reserve instance purchase that is running 24/7. That's the key criteria you've got to aim for. Reserve instances also cover SQL databases, Cosmos DB, and Linux. Right, so it's not just VMs. Best prices with Azure, the best discounts that you can get from Azure is applying a reserve instance as well as Azure hybrid benefit to the VM. You can save up to 82% cost savings versus the pay-as-you-go rate, which is the full rate. Right? When you buy a reserve instance, you do not discount. You only discount the compute portion of your VM. You do not discount the Windows OS portion. So what will show up on the bill is the reserve instance that you bought, and then the Windows Server portion that you haven't accounted for. To get rid of the Windows Server portion, you apply the Azure hybrid benefit. That will then you can achieve a full discount on that VM. Now, with reserve instances as well, as you might get into a scenario where you no longer need a VM. And in cloud, we always talk about being flexible, being able to scale down whenever we want to, or change the VM type whenever we want to. So this still applies with reserve instance. You're allowed to reassign the reserve instance, obviously, to a different subscription if you're targeting a subscription. So you just reassign the reserve instance to a new subscription or a resource group. But it still needs to be within the same family, VM type family, and the same region. You're allowed to exchange the reserve instance for a different type. There is a criteria for this, is that what you're exchanging to needs to be more expensive or the same price as what is currently left on that reserve instance, the credit available on the reserve instance. If it's less, Microsoft can't change it because they'll have to, refund the credit, and it just gets too complicating to do that, right? So if the new reserve instance that you're applying for is more, then you would have to pay for the difference, but then you basically exchange for a new reserve instance. The new reserve instance would reset its timer and start from day 0 of the 1 or 3 year term. If you want to cancel the reserve instance, so let's say we've got 5 VMs, 5 reserve instances, but we've shut down 4 of them and we're only running 1, right? And you want to cancel the reserve instance, you can still cancel your reserve instance. You have to pay a cancellation fee for that. So there is a loss. You will suffer a loss in canceling a reserve instance. What we recommend is to exchange it if possible, or reassign it if possible, before considering returning or canceling the reserve instance. So hybrid use benefit. So Azure hybrid benefit is primarily, well, it's just talking about the OS license or the SQL Server license associated to the virtual machine. If you've got an existing Windows Server or SQL Server license on premises with software assurance bought through volume license or open or whatever plan, but it has to have a valid software assurance. The software assurance portion allows you migration rights into cloud, well, into Azure, or into actually virtual migration rights. Right. So this means that those with software assurance on Windows Server licenses can get a discount in Azure. What you want to do is you get so the way it's calculated is the full cost of a VM or a SQL server, right? It's the base rate plus the OS. So the base rate is the compute cost plus the operating system cost. When you apply hybrid benefit, you are, well, let's say you apply hybrid benefit for SQL, you save on the SQL Server license portion, and you remove that off a machine with SQL. So this example here is for a SQL Enterprise Edition with Windows, right? So you apply the SQL hybrid benefit, you're saving that. You're saving the cost of that SQL Server license. Then you apply the hybrid benefit for Windows Server, and you're saving the cost of the Windows Server portion as well, which means you only have to pay for the compute cost of that VM. Literally what it means to be a Linux VM, right? Then if you apply reserve instance to that, you get a further discount on that base rate, the compute cost, and you're bringing it down, essentially saving up to 93% if you're running a SQL Server Enterprise Edition with Windows, up to 93%. This is, obviously different based on different regions and different machines, but the highest you can save is 93%. So imagine paying 7% for running a VM in the cloud. I think it's pretty good incentive, right? So hybrid use benefit for SQL Server. So what I was saying before, you get the OS layer, you get an infrastructure layer, and if you enable hybrid benefit, you're removing the OS layer. And obviously to qualify for hybrid use benefit, you have to have the software assurance, or if you purchase the Windows Server license from CSP. So that's the other way to get hybrid use benefit, is buying the Windows Server standard license from CSP. CSP doesn't have software assurance, but it's got that migration rights into Azure that enables the hybrid use benefit access. So what are the rules on Windows Server licensing? Windows Server licensing is a very, very touchy topic. It's very, very complex. Basically, the guideline states that, well, Microsoft has updated their guidelines on this and their official standing on the rules on Windows Server licenses. Right? Each Windows Server license set of 16 cores grants you hybrid benefit for 2 VMs up to 8 cores or a single VM up to 16 cores. What this means is that if you, let's say you have 100 core licenses for Windows Server, you can run 12 VMs up to 8 cores or 6 VMs up to 16 cores with some leftovers. Right? If you have a VM of more than 16 cores, you will need to stack in multiples of 16. So let's say, for example, you have a 28 core VM. You need 2 sets of 16 core licenses, which makes up 32 cores to license that 28 core VM license. With Windows Server Data Center license, you're allowed to run in parallel both the on-premises version of that operating system, of that workload, together with the Azure instance of that workload. With Windows Server Standard licenses, you can only run exclusively, so on-premises or Azure, not together, not in parallel. There is an additional note that states that you get a 180-day exception to Windows Server Standard licenses if you're migrating the workload from on-premises to Azure. Then you can run them both in parallel for up to 180 days, and then you have to shut either one of them down. In the current environment, here's an example scenario of how we would apply the Azure Hybrid benefit for a Windows Server. So the current environment has 3 physical servers with 16 cores each. It's heavily virtualized, therefore it's licensed with a Windows Server 2016 Data Center Edition with SA, with software assurance. Oops, let's go back. With a total of 48 core licenses. The desired state is, well, we want to move it into Azure. This customer is looking to run 2 Windows Server VMs with 4 cores in Azure for test and dev environment. They identified A4 V2 VMs meet their needs. They're also willing to migrate the inventory tracking system to Azure that requires 4 VMs at 8 cores each. They've identified the 8 V3 VMs that to meet their needs. So the solution for this is, since the customer has 48 core licenses on premises, that allows them to run 6 VMs with 8 core each in Azure at the base compute rate. Right. Windows Server Data Center Edition allows them to run both on-premise and Azure in parallel, so they can run it both sides. So the criteria of running a test dev environment in the cloud, it's fine. By utilizing Azure Hybrid benefit, customer will save 46% or $14,000 US a year for these 6 VMs in scenario 1. Now let's have a look at scenario 2. The customer has 2 physical servers with 16 cores each, running 4 VMs per physical server, 8 VMs in total. It's currently licensed for Windows 2012 Standard Edition with 8 processor licenses. 8 processor licenses is equivalent to 8 times 4 cores, I believe. Customer servers are aging and they would like to gradually move their workloads into Azure. So this is gradually moving their workloads. So they're not going to run in parallel. They're also looking to move one of their line of business applications in the first phase. This line of business application is running 2 VMs at 4 cores assigned to each. They identified D4 V3 VMs to meet their needs. Since the customer has 8 processor licenses in Standard Edition, Azure Hybrid benefit allows them to run 8 VMs at 8 cores each in Azure as the base compute rate. Oh, that's right. Since customer is looking to run 2 VMs at 2 processor licenses, can be moved to Azure, and customer can leverage Azure Hybrid benefit for this. So they're fine. By utilizing the Azure Hybrid benefit, the customer will save 49% or $3,200 a year in these two VMs. This is most probably in US dollars. Let's go into scenario 3. Customer has 2 physical servers, 16 cores each, running 4 VMs per physical server. Now note, Windows 2012 is per core licenses, right? Per processor licenses compared to Windows 2016 per core licenses. So that there's a difference in this. Each processor license gives you 1 8-core license. Each physical server requires 16 cores, which is 2 processor licenses. That's the rules around processors. So this is a scenario adding in reserve instance as well. So the customer servers are aging. They would like to gradually move their workloads to Azure. They are looking to move one of their line of business applications in the first phase. This line of business application is running 2 VMs at 4 cores assigned each. They identified D4, V3 VMs to meet their needs. Since the customer has 8 processors licenses, the Azure Hybrid benefit allows them to run up to 8 VMs, up to 8 cores each in Azure as the base compute rate, at the base compute rate. Says each customer is looking to run 2 VMs, 2 processor licenses of Windows Server Standard Editions can be moved to Azure, and the customer can leverage Azure Hybrid benefit for the Windows Server. By utilizing Hybrid benefit and Azure Reserve instances, the customer saves about 70%, which is $4,581 a year for the 2 VMs, US dollars. So for Hybrid benefit for SQL Server, each SQL Enterprise 1 core license will, with software assurance, gives you the ability to run 1 business critical vCore, 4 general purpose vCores. Sorry, so 1 business critical vCore in Azure or 4 general purpose vCores. For each SQL standard 1 core license with SA, you can run 1 general purpose vCore with Hybrid benefit in Azure. With SQL Server Hybrid benefit, you can only run either on-premises or Azure, not in parallel, not concurrently. Here's the sample scenario for SQL Server Hybrid benefit. The customer has 3 SQL VMs with 8 cores assigned to each, licensed with SQL Server 2016 Standard Edition with SA. Total of 24 core licenses are available, so 12 2-core packs. The customer is looking to migrate one of their database servers to Azure SQL Database and will be running vCore model with 8 general purpose cores. Since the customer has 24 core licenses of SQL Server 2016, Hybrid benefit allows them to convert up to 24 general purpose vCores in Azure SQL Database. They can convert 8 core licenses of their SQL Standard Edition licenses to 8 general purpose vCores in Azure SQL Database, Managed Instance SQL or SQL Database or Elastic Pool. But they have to retire one of their on-premises SQL servers. But by utilizing this Azure Hybrid benefit, the customer is looking to save 40% or $7,000 a year for a single database, or $3,500 a year for managed instance, US dollars. Azure is the most cost-effective cloud for Windows Server 2008 and 2008 R2. I mentioned this before. We're looking at a 5 times cost saving, well, cost difference to AWS. You want just a reminder to get the free extended security updates in Azure for Windows Server 2008. as well as the Azure hybrid benefit that you get exclusively with Azure. AWS does have reserved instances though, so it's sort of on par. Coming up on the next module. So this is the end of our module today. Coming up on the next module, we are talking about Windows Virtual Desktop, exclusively booked in for Windows Virtual Desktop. That's because there are a lot of information about Windows Virtual Desktop that I would like to go through. I would try to keep it within the hour if possible. This is the end of the module. We'll keep the lines open for 2 minutes for questions and answers. Please post them up if you can. And I will try and get back in touch with you directly on that. Feel free to contact me on my email address as well, or for those of you that have my phone numbers, just give me a ring whenever. Yeah, and it's great to be presenting this for you today. Thank you.